let's talk about folk horror. Rural and ancient wisdoms, long repressed and forgotten, rise up again, much to the consternation of modern man. Culture and tradition, which, despite outside pressure, is sustained through the sheer will of the people, the folk. It asks, what if the old way of thinking was right? Or if not right exactly, what if, despite it all, the old way of thinking was more powerful? Though folk horror is global and timeless, its current definition as a genre comes into being via 3 British films, dubbed the Unholy Trilogy. Witchfinder General from 1968, The Blood on Satan's Claw from 1971, and The Wicker Man from 1973. These 3 films, although seemingly disparate, come to represent the main storylines of folk horror. Witchfinder General is the traditional period piece that represents the horror of the past to a modern audience. A kind of, can you believe society used to behave this way? At the time, it was largely a response to Hammer films, which were seen as campy and the gothic tropes tired. The director, Michael Reeves, inspired by the nihilism of westerns, wanted to create a grittier version of period horror. Witchfinder General takes place in Britain in a 17th century civil war, when the country was run by fear and uncertainty. So Matthew Hopkins, a real-life historical figure, takes advantage of the chaos, running rampant as a bloodthirsty witch hunter. We, the audience, are shocked and dismayed by the people's willingness to help Hopkins in his bloody work, and how they revel in the theater of the brutal witch trials. Next was 1971's The Blood on Satan's Claw, which represents another storyline common to folk horror. This idea of the past literally being dug up again, and an old horror released. It takes a hold of the psyche of the locals, wreaking havoc on their community. Inspired by a true story of a child murderer, and relying heavily on the current fears of the normalization of female sexuality and a youth movement coming up against the establishment. The Blood on Satan's Claw is a variation of a possession theme, but to me it maintains its distinct folkiness, largely due to its horror taking place during the day. This idea that horror doesn't have to be dark and shadowy to be scary. Its horror is in the psychological, of ritual, of groupthink. Then there's 1973's The Wicker Man, which is one of my favorite films of all time and represents a third popular folk storyline. An outsider arrives in an isolated and/or insular community and is taken in by the old magic. In the case of Wicker Man, that outsider is a representation of Christian thought, of patriarchy and close-mindedness. But this outsider might also be an academic, studying the culture but not really believing in it, though their obsession with it makes it realer than ever. Or someone trying to escape emotional turmoil by isolating in a rural setting, but that turmoil follows them there to new and terrifying heights. This storyline is one of the most potent in folk horror because it plays most strongly into the tension of modern moviegoers. In the 60s, there was the back to the land movement of the hippies in Britain and America, but folk horror played on the naivete of this movement, that they believed civilization was a corrupting force. So going back to the land would be a more natural way of being. But what if the land rejected you? What if you weren't really a revolutionary, but a gentrifier? As the author Howard David Ingham put it, we don't go back is the fundamental tension of folk horror. We don't go back because if we go back, we enter a realm of superstition and madness. In British folk horror, they play on the tension of Christianity versus paganism, how they appropriate each other and merge to a point of confusion. What is right and what is true is a matter of opinion. In American folk horror, an otherness comes into play. The otherness of Native Americans and the Indian burial ground of it all. Also fears of voodoo and hoodoo, of the backroadedness of the hill people in Appalachia. And, of course, the hysteria around witches. Japan also has a rich folklore history, stemming from yokai, a class of supernatural entities and spirits in Japanese folklore. Their preoccupation with the juxtaposition of city and rural cultures is also an obvious connection. Some of my favorite J-folk horror films are Demon Pond, Shikoku, and Noroi the Curse. Folk horror is even more relevant today, as modern anxieties are even more extreme and ever-present. Some modern folk horror films are already classics in their own right. The Witch and Midsummer, of course, or lesser-known films like Lamb and Men. Some other common motifs in folk horror are cults, human sacrifice, curses, and, of course, psychic geography. Psychogeography? I don't know, I prefer psychic geography. Basically, former inhabitants of the land's consciousnesses press themselves into the landscape, and modern man picks up on those reverberations. A bit like a haunting, you might say, but it's earthier. It's less personal and more inevitable as erosion, as nature. If you're interested in learning more about folk horror and its many incarnations around the world, I highly recommend watching the exhaustive documentary Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched by Kira Janice, which comes on the All the Haunts BR's box set from Severin, or you can stream it on Shudder. These All the Haunts BR's box sets, also curated by Janice, are incredible. They provide such an extensive survey of folk horror throughout time and across the world. Definitely worth checking out. What's your favorite folk horror film? TV show? Book? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.